Welcome to Life Church. We are so happy that you're here and that you're tuning in online. We are so excited to have a great day with you. If you are comfortable, stand and sing with us. You come all saints, every race and every nation. Come all rebels, come all gay. From the fringes, come to Jesus, to a table full of grace. Come all proud, come all greedy, come all liars, come all shamed, come all wealthy, come receive it, to the table come today. we thank you that you are with us on the fringes. You are with us every day. Every breath we take is your air in our lungs. Help us feel your presence. Help us to love and feel your love. You are holy. You are wonderful. Be with us today. Let us feel your presence. Amen.
All right. Well, amen. Thank you, band. And you all may be seated. That was wonderful. Hey, well, good morning. Welcome to Life Church. So glad you are joining with us. For those of you who are here in the room with us, those of you who are joining us online for our 10:45 service. Exciting day today. There's a few things that are going on here. First of which, we already had our 9 a.m. service. So now we have our 10:45. So glad to see you here today with us, celebrating sort of this reopening, this sort of milestone in our reopening journey. It's been since pre-COVID that we had our 2 services, or 9 to 10:45. So it's an exciting day, which is why we have those bounce houses out there. We're going to celebrate. So some of you, maybe some of your kids have been taking advantage of those. That will be up after the service too. We also have some Duck Donuts out there after service. You might have been looking for them beforehand. Got to stick around to the end and you'll get some of those. So anyway, it's a fun day. We're excited to be here. Thanks for joining with us. And as we always say at Life Church, each and every time we get together, our hope is to help you, in your journey of having a genuine, meaningful interaction with God. And so the way we like to say is we like to lead people to Jesus for life. And so we hope that by being here, we help you on your spiritual journey. And so wherever you're at on that journey, we're glad you're here, whether you're kind of all in with faith and Jesus and God and church, or whether you got questions, or you're struggling, or you're sort of 50% in, and there's a 50% of you that's like just not sure. Wherever you're at, that's okay. And we probably have questions, and we're happy to work through those questions together, or answer any of that, or just dialogue about any of that. I think if we're all honest, we all still have questions. I question the people who don't have any more questions. That's kind of how it works for me generally. But anyway, good to see you. Thanks for being here. Please take a moment to fill out our digital connection card. That you can find that in the Life Church app on your phone. If you don't have the Life Church app, you can find that just by searching your app store, Life Church Lancaster. You'll find us. Just make sure you add Lancaster on the end, and you'll find us pretty quickly. And that's a great way to stay connected to what's going on here at the church. You can do a lot of different things through our app. It's one of the primary ways we communicate, and ways you can get information about things that are going on. So the digital connection card is in there. Let us know you're engaged with us, whether you're watching online or whether you're here in the room with us. Let me look at my list here. There's a few other things we have going on today, and I just wanted to mention. First, thank you for those of you who invest financially here at Life Church. We can't pursue our mission of connecting people with Jesus without the financial gifts and contributions from everybody who engages here. And so thanks for that investment. And if, again, in the app, if you want to make a donation, in the app, there's a place there where we can tell you all the different ways you can give here. There's like 14 different ways. So take advantage of whichever one works best for you, and thank you for that. So tonight is something that fun is happening. If you've got kids, teens, if you've got teens, our youth group is getting back up and running for the fall. So they're hanging out tonight, 6:30 to 8 p.m. Sunday nights. You can count on that every Sunday night. So that's 9th grade to 12th grade. Your kids are invited to come on out. You can invite their friends. They're going to have a good time here hanging out tonight, and then every Sunday night thereafter. And the other thing that I often get questions about is, hey, when are your small groups starting back up? So our small groups are just smaller groups of people who meet in homes typically, and hang out for community, for camaraderie, for support, to learn and grow together. And so that new semester of groups, it'll run from starting in a couple of weeks. It's September 26th, I think is the week they start, and that'll run to early December. And then we take a break for Christmas, and so you don't have to worry too much about the Christmas schedule. So, but anyway, that group's session is getting ready to begin. So next week, signups will be live on our website. You can go to the website, find out what groups are happening. If you're not already plugged into one, and then you can figure out which one you are interested in, and you can inquire about that group, and then we can work to get you connected. And so signups start next week, and then the week after that, the groups will begin meeting. So that's happening here. So that's some of the stuff that's going on here at Life Church. Today's an exciting day, as I said, as we're kind of reopening in this capacity, and we're starting a new teaching series today called Disrupted. We're talking about the disruptions in life. and what we can learn through the disruptions. We feel like we've been living, I feel like I've been living for 18 months of disruptions. Just when you think you're getting back to normal, you're not. And so, anyway, we're going to be thinking about some of that in the next few weeks. I'm excited about that. But there's kind of no greater disruption that's really happened in the life of our nation than what we are honoring this weekend to the 20th anniversary of the September 11th events. And so, as we transition into the message, I thought we'd just take a moment to kind of watch a little video that kind of puts some reflection thoughts together about the events of September 11th. And so, sit back, relax, enjoy that video as we kind of prepare to think about disruption.
When it first happened, the minutes felt like hours. The hours felt like days, and the horror of what happened, one detail after another, could hardly be processed, much less understood. Then days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into years. Memorials were built, wars were fought, victims' names were read, survivors tried to pick up the pieces over and over again. But no matter how much time has passed, we vowed to hold these memories. We will never forget those who were taken from us. The world changes and shifts this way and that. But one thing stays constant. One thing is steady. God. God weeps with us. God mourns with us. God bottles up our tears and records them in His book. He is closer to you than your own breath and remains the cornerstone of life. God is the solid ground holding us up as the world moves beneath us. It's as true today as it was on that day. Our God reigns. He reigns over principalities and powers. His dominion stretches beyond what our eyes can see. And when the thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy, our God reigns. And we will always remember.
It's hard to believe 20 years have passed, just for those of us who are old enough to remember the events of that day. And there's a lot to think about when you think spiritually speaking, God and 9/11 and all of that. And, all different faith traditions have their own opinions about things, and I don't have all the answers at all, as I had already alluded to. When it comes to thinking about this, but what I appreciate about that video is the reference to something Jesus said. He said, the thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy. Jesus said, but I have come that they might have life and have it abundantly. And so, where is God in these moments of pain, disruption, heartache, devastation? I'm convinced that while I can't figure it all out, put all the pieces together, make sense of it all, stealing, killing, destroying, death, mayhem, that comes from the thief, not from God. Jesus said, I've come that they might have life and have it abundantly. And so, wherever you find yourself this weekend and thinking about 9/11, our hearts are with you. I also mentioned, some of you maybe know, and I'm probably embarrassed that I mentioned this, but Artie Van Wise with us this morning. He's part of our community here at Life Church. He did experience 9/11 from there in New York City at Ground Zero, and he's written about that in 2 books that he put together, one called That Day in September, and another one called 9/11, a Memoir. Did I get that right, Artie? 9/11, a Memoir?
A survivor story.
A survivor story, there you go. And so he's written really eloquently on his experiences there. We're so thankful to have him as a part of our community. And encourage you to engage with his writing, just hang out with Artie afterwards. So we're going to be thinking the next few weeks about disruption. and it seems apropos for where we're at in our world today. So life is full of disruptions, and most of the time life doesn't really play out as we planned, right? Sometimes disruptions can be small, right? You know, you run into traffic on your way to work and you end up late and you're kind of grumpy and you spill your coffee on yourself and, you know, that kind of a thing. That's a small disruption. Maybe a coworker knocks on your door at some point and interrupts your day for 30 minutes and you have an interruption or disruption to your day. You know, these kinds of disruptions can be annoying and frustrating, but ultimately in the big scheme of things, they're just not that big of a deal. Other disruptions are larger and more significant and more difficult to experience and to pick yourself up from. Clearly 9/11 was one such disruption for our nation and for especially those who were directly connected to those events in history. Maybe more personally, maybe you had a business and it was going well and then it wasn't going well anymore. Something disrupted your business and your hopes and your dreams for that, and that whole thing had to fold or crash. Maybe it's a relationship, a friendship, maybe it's a romantic relationship, a spouse or someone, a fiance. It was going really good, and then something disrupted that relationship. Something happened that broke it apart, or something. Maybe a tree fell on your garage, demolishing your cars and the garage and everything in it. That's also a disruption that happens. For those who don't know, that's what happened to me last week when Ida came through. One other major disruption that we're all obviously dealing with is this reality of the pandemic and COVID-19 and what do we do through this. We thought maybe, I went into the summer and was sort of like hopeful and optimistic. Woo-hoo, we're putting this behind us. But here we are still dealing with this reality. We thought we were going back to normal, but we're not back to normal yet. So life is full of disruptions, and we make plans, we have hopes, we have dreams, and then something happens, and it changes everything. It changes our direction, our course. Disruptions are inevitable. So the question we're wrestling with as we think through this series is, how should we live when life has been disrupted? What do we do? What can we learn? How do we navigate the disruptions of life? So for the next few weeks, we're going to be studying a story that we find in the scriptures, and it's a really important story. It's one you might not have heard, kind of had the overarching view of. You might hear a lot of little stories that are part of this bigger story, but it's one of the main narratives that happens in scriptures, and it's the story of what is called the exile. And it's talking, when we say the exile, we're talking about the nation of Israel spent a significant portion of its time and its history in exile. And so they had established their nation, and then another nation came and beat up on them and took a lot of their people away to the foreign nation, and they called that living in exile. And that is it's a massive piece of the story of the scriptures. And so it's helpful to understand the story. So I'm excited to kind of teach through it and help us think through this event that happened in history and in the story of Israel, but then also to think about what can we learn, because there's actually some really interesting parallels to life today. And things I think we can learn. And so let's just think first here about the exile and what was it. Because it was this historical event that was in the history of the nation of Israel, which I mentioned already. It happened, or it kind of began to happen. Scholars give a date. We've got to give dates to things, even though sometimes things take a decade to kind of happen and all that kind of stuff. But 586 BC is the time period in which they say this is sort of like when the exile began. And it's when the Assyrians came over to Israel and beat up on them pretty serious. Assyria was this massive rising empire and kind of taking over more and more countries, and Israel was a part of that. And so they came and they defeated Israel. They tore down the walls, they beat up on the city and the temple and everything, and then they hauled off a bunch of people, Israelites, back to Babylon, because that was sort of what they did in those days. And so in your Bible, the book of Daniel is one of the books that's written as a part of the story. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were some of those guys who were taken from Israel and taken to live in the foreign nation. It's a story of exile. And actually, as is true, we look at, 20 years ago 9/11 happened, and we're like, wow, we're still living in the realities of 9/11, like it shaped our world. The world that Jesus was born into, that he taught and did his ministry in, was shaped by the story and the experience of exile. right? And so those themes really shaped the life of Jesus in many ways. And so once the Israelites were taken into captivity, taken to Babylon, there's about a 70-year time period where they stayed there, and they were held captive. And then, world power shifted and changed to some degrees. There's a new guy in charge. And after about 70 years, they were allowed to go back to their land and start to kind of rebuild their land. And that's where we have the stories of like Ezra and Nehemiah. Jeremiah is prophesying during this time. The book of Lamentations was written out of the anguish that happened when they were pulled and taken away. And so this is a big part of the biblical story. And as most major disruptions in life, it's not simply a historical event that happened in the nation's history. It is that. But it was also this massive spiritual event. Because when a disruption like this happens in life, there's all kinds of spiritual implications to it. Things we think we know about God, things we think we believe, all of a sudden get tested and challenged in one way or another. And that was true for the nation of Israel. All of a sudden they're grappling with, where is God? I thought we were the nation. I thought God was with us. Why in the world did this happen? And there's all kinds of writings in the scriptures of them processing what in the world just happened. I mean, things like, where's God in this chaos? Why did God allow this to happen? How do we worship our God when our temple is destroyed? Right? The temple worship was central to the entire Jewish way of life. Now the temple's destroyed, and they live in a foreign nation. They can't even worship in the way that they used to worship. And plus, we're supposed to sacrifice animals. That's all through our scriptures, but we don't even have an altar or a temple. We cannot worship in the same way we used to worship because of this massive disruption. What in the world are we supposed to do? Does any of that sound familiar? Right? And so, there's all kinds of processing. And today, I want to look at the events that lead up to the exile, or at least a quick look at some of these events that lead up to the exile, with the hope of understanding how massive this disruption affected the spiritual lives of these people and what we can learn from it. So to get into this, though, I need a little bit more. I need to give you a little more background, a little more history, if you can bear with me. Thank you very much. All right, so, you're in here now. The Eagles game always starts at 1, so we got plenty of time. All right, so, go Birds. All right, so a little bit of history that you should be aware of. So the Old Testament part of our Bibles is a very large portion, right? The New Testament, the church, kind of the documents that are written directly to the church, is relatively small compared to the big part of the Old Testament. And we call it the Old Testament. It might be called the Jewish scriptures, the Hebrew scriptures. But that whole section of your Bible really traces the story of the nation of Israel. That's kind of the big overarching story. How they started with this guy by the name of Abraham. God promised to Abraham, I'll make you a nation, and I will bless those who bless you, and through you I will bless the world. Which was ultimately a prophecy about the person of Jesus would be a descendant of Abraham and the descendant of the nation of Israel. And so Abraham had a son. That son had a couple of sons. Those sons had 12 sons. One of those sons had 12 sons. And those 12 sons become the nation of Israel. Or at that point, they become the tribes of Israel. This is like tribal family culture. And that whole group of 12 ended up, and all of their wives and concubines and children and livestock ended up in Egypt for a season. You might remember this story. They ended up going down to Egypt. They were in Egypt because of a famine, and Egypt had food, and so they get there. That's where the whole Joseph and coat of many colors story comes in. And so you got that whole thing that happens, and then they end up staying there a lot longer than they intended. They end up staying there for like 400 years. And they grew and grew and grew as a people, and eventually were feared and enslaved by the Egyptians. And then you have Moses who shows up. Moses says, let my people go, and 10 plagues, and they come out of Egypt, and they come into the wilderness. And now they have, some people say 1 million, a few million people possibly, and they wander out into the wilderness as this newly birthed people group, trying to stand on their own 2 feet. They go through some battles, they go to the land of Canaan, the flowing with milk and honey, the promised land, and they now have a land, they have people, they have land, and then they set up their nation. And then there's this moment where, that enters into the season they call the Judges, and it's like the Wild West. It's crazy. If If you think Netflix is pretty, some shows on Netflix are pretty intense, you should read the book of Judges, because that's really good material. But anyway, it's the crazy Wild West, and so people are like, we need a king. We need a king. God's like, well, I'm your king. And they're like, we want one we can see. And God's like, that hurts my feelings. And so they fought with God for a while about it, and then so God said, all right, I'll give you a king, and they give him this guy by the name of Saul. And then Saul doesn't do so well, and then David comes along, and David is a great king, right? He's got some issues, he's got a dark side, but he leads well, and he's a man after God's own heart, and David helps the kingdom establish. That we're a nation now. We got laws, and we got a king, and we got an army, and we're expanding our borders, and our religious habits are in place, our procedures, our rites and rituals, and we got the, and so David wanted to build the temple. I don't remember this part. David was like, all right, we've been in this tent tabernacle thing forever. Like, now it's time to build a temple, because all the other cool gods have temples. And so David's like, God, I want to build a temple. And God's like, I don't want you to build my temple. And how about your son? He'll build it. And so Solomon builds the temple, and Solomon's super smart and expands the borders farther. And they're like legit now. They're like affluent. They're doing well. They're like one of the cool nations on the block, right? They're successful. They've got a wise leader. You know, people are coming from all over the world to get advice from Solomon, and things are going really, really well. Israel is on the up and up. They're finally, getting the credit they deserve as this people group. And so what happens during this season, during this sort of positive trajectory season, is that they become more and more confident in who they are and who they are as a nation. And that confidence leads almost into an overconfidence. They begin to hold on to this idea that nothing could ever go wrong. We're God's people, right? They developed this religious belief, this understanding that they were better than all the other nations, that they were God's people, and God was with them in ways He was not with other nations. God didn't care about the other nations, and they were just the enemies. It was us versus them, and we are the ones that God is with, and we are, supreme, and no one can ever take us out. We are God's people. And there's a phrase that scholars use to talk about this dynamic called the inviolability of Zion. So Zion is another name for Jerusalem. The Bible's a lot like Lord of the Rings in this regard. Every town, every people, everybody's got like 4 names. And so you're always like, wait, no, are we talking about Strider or are we talking about Aragorn? Yes, right, it's the same, right? Are we talking about Jerusalem or are we talking about Zion? Yes, same place. All right, so that's helpful to know when you read your Bible. And so they believe that nothing could possibly ever happen to their beloved city of Zion because God is with us. Now, it's not too different from, those of you who were, cogent adults in the 90s. Anybody in here? I was becoming an adult in the 90s, right? The 90s were great. It was a good time. MP3s were, created in the 90s. Like websites were created in the 90s. So we had this massive tech boom, right? The .com boom happened in the 90s. And all of a sudden everybody's like, you gotta have a website. All this stuff. And it created massive industry, massive economic benefits. In the 90s, we were rolling $100 bills up, and smoking them like cigars. That's what it was like in the 90s, right? Because it was up and to the right. Things were going really good in the 90s because of the .com thing. But then that bubble burst and, life happens. But anyway, Israel's sort of like in a season like that. Celebration, power, everything's good, nothing can go wrong, we're just on top of the world. What could hurt us? Things are going amazing. And it was in a season like this when a psalm called Psalm 46, you might be familiar with it, was written. And you can feel the tone in this psalm when we think about it in this broader context. And I want to read this to you and then point out a couple of things. Listen to what the psalmist says in Psalm 46. He says this: God is our refuge and strength, always ready to help in times of trouble. So we'll not fear when earthquakes come and the mountains crumble into the seas. Let the oceans roar and foam. Let the mountains tremble as the waters surge. Right? He's like, we're good. Let nature do whatever it's going to do. Earthquakes, storms, fires, hazards, whatever. We're good to go. Verse 4. A river brings joy in the city of our God. That's Zion, or Israel, or Jerusalem. The sacred home of the Most High. God's home is here in Jerusalem. There's this sacred river, they're saying. It's a metaphorical sacred river that brings joy into the city. Verse 5, God dwells in that city. It cannot be destroyed. From the very break of day, God will protect it. So no matter what might happen in the world, the psalm is saying, we're good. We're Jerusalem. We're in the city of Zion. God is protecting us. Nothing will go wrong. And he concludes that our city cannot be destroyed. It's kind of a big statement, don't you think? It cannot be destroyed. Their confidence in God's presence with them, which God would say God was present. But that confidence in that presence turned into an overconfidence, believing that nothing bad, that would equal nothing bad would ever happen. We can do whatever we want because God's on our side. Their wealth, affluence, military power, religious confidence combined to give them this overrealized certainty and a bit of blind arrogance. Right? This also meant that they had a lot of expectations on how life would go and what God would or would not do. Right? When you're living in this sort of place of like confidence and arrogance and hubris and blind expectation, or just like this affluence, you naturally absorb a lot of expectations about what can and can't happen. Expectations. Well, surely this wouldn't happen. I'm sure that, well, if I do this and I do this, then this is going to happen. And we know that this is going to happen. And this could never happen. Because you begin to make, that's the word I'm looking for, enculturate or believe, maybe that's just the word, you begin to believe a lot of expectations. Expectations are really powerful things, right? When you're expecting that first year of marriage to just be woo through the roof, and then it's not, you're like, crash and burn. Like it hurts even more, right? If you're expecting some trouble, then maybe it doesn't hurt as bad when the trouble comes. So a major point I want to drive home with you today is just this, that misplaced and misinformed expectations set the stage for major disruptions. Misplaced, misinformed expectations in life set the stage for major disruptions on our journey. Let me give you a few examples here. Here's some things that kind of bleed into our religious thinking, our spiritual thinking. Stuff like, well, if you act good, then good things will happen to you. Good things will come your way. Just do good and good things will come your way. And you'd say, well, that's a good thing. That's generally true. Is it 100% true all of the time? I'm sure someone in here can testify and say, no, that wasn't true for me. I was doing really good. I did all the right things and I got shellacked for one reason or another. Hardship and pain still come our way. Or maybe another one. Work hard and you'll get ahead. Work hard and you'll get ahead in life. Is that always true? Is it a good principle to work hard? Yeah, that's a good principle to work hard. That's a good work ethic. That's good. But does that always mean you're going to get ahead in life? Probably not. Sometimes people work incredibly hard and forces outside of their control keep knocking them over, keep knocking their legs out from underneath them. And sometimes people who are getting ahead in life aren't working very hard. You know that person across the hall at your office, right? Or maybe it's your neighbor or your brother or your sister. Like, they're just, like, what? Everything just goes their way. Maybe they have a lot of luck, or maybe they have help from others. Or maybe they had a big boost from family in getting started. See, sometimes when we aren't working hard, actually seem to be moving ahead faster. On a spiritual framework, we could think about some misinformed expectations. This is one that often crops up in religious communities and churches, that someone you love is sick. Well, if you pray hard enough and you have enough faith, then they'll be healed. Right? And sometimes that works, and we should do that, right? If someone you love is sick, we should pray hard, and we should believe. Sometimes that works and we celebrate, and other times it doesn't play out. And that can create a massive disruption in someone's life, in someone's faith journey. Or even another one that goes like this. Well, if you just give to God, you'll have everything. Give to God, you'll have everything you ever need. And that has been preached by many, many preachers from stages and pulpits. But I find it interesting that we rarely notice that the Apostle Paul, someone in the Scriptures who's encouraged us to give, to be generous with our finances, to invest our resources, to sow generously with our financial resources. He told us to do that. He lived a life of massive, wild, abandoned generosity. He also says that there were times in his life when he was beaten, naked, hungry, and afraid. Sometimes we get a little too A plus B equals C, always, in real life, in the spiritual world. Misplaced and misinformed expectations can set the stage for major disruptions. Saying it just a little bit differently, I could say that the roots of disruption are found in unfair expectations. Or if you want to rhyme a little bit more, you could say the roots of expectations are found in unfounded expectations. Like that. So back to the story of the Israelites. For these Israelites, during the season of abundance and wealth and peace and safety, right? They had David, they had Solomon, they had abundance, they had massive good things happening. And this was a part of their culture. They began to see life not as precious and delicate gift to be cherished every moment and something that is fragile, but as something they were owed. They began to make confident assertions about things that they should have had more humility about. They began to see themselves as having complete control over their own destiny, even controlling things that were well out of their control. Let the waters surge. Let the thunder boom. Let the earthquakes come, the psalmist says. Nothing bad is going to happen to us because God is on our side. But how many of us know someone who is a faithful follower of Jesus, faithfully devoted person of faith and religion, who's something terrible has happened to, whose the earthquake decimated their town, or the tornado ripped through the neighborhood? Right? Sometimes hurricanes and tornadoes bring devastation even on faithful followers of God. Sometimes painful disruption happens even on people who everyone would conclude don't deserve it. Right? And these Israelites had kind of lost that sense. That sense that, there's just more mystery to this whole thing than we sometimes want to embrace. We want it formulated. We want bullet points. We want it nailed down so we know exactly what we can depend on. Give me the expectations. If I do this, then this happens. If I do this, then this happens. There's just a lot more mystery in a walk with God and interacting with the divine than that really allows for. See, they didn't like the question marks clouding up their clear view of themselves and of God and of how the universe works. They lost their sense for how much of life and good things should be appreciated, cherished, relished, and not taken for granted. And this was a moment, this sort of psalm is really just an expression of sort of this arrogance in many respects. And they were primed for disruption. Our city cannot be destroyed, except that it was in 586 BC. Its unfounded expectations lead to massive disruptions. So what happens for us too when we stop seeing the good gifts of life as blessings to be appreciated, instead simply seeing them as something we are owed, something we're deserved, something we can just fabricate by following a few rules? And the pandemic's helped us to see how much we take for granted, right? These 18 months, my goodness, when will this ever be over? But haven't we all, to some degree, realized, wow, I took a lot for granted. Just being able to hang out with family or friends, go to a restaurant, to be in public without a sense of fear or concern. We've taken our health for granted, our financial security for granted, being able to gather for granted. So many things we've just taken for granted, and we've become aware of that through this whole experience. And there's something really helpful in that. It helps us find a place of humility. Help us see our dependence on God. Help us to not become so arrogant about things. So the question I want you to think about this week is just this. Have I stopped having a healthy appreciation for all the blessings in my life? Have I stopped having a healthy appreciation for all the blessings in my life? Again, I think the pandemic has helped us. It's been a bit of a bell ringer in many respects. But what are the things in your life that you have that you can be super grateful for? Things that ultimately we have to hold with open hands, right? And say, I hope this lasts forever. This is wonderful. This is good. But I don't know. I would love to say this can never be destroyed. And yet it might be. So I should enjoy this moment. I should have some humility in this moment. I should wake up to this moment and cherish the things that are most important in this moment. This is something that a disruption like the pandemic can teach us. It's something that the disruption of the exile taught the Israelites. So this idea is spoken of in the New Testament scriptures also. So I want to tell you about the passage there and then we'll be done. But Jesus had a half brother. Jesus actually had several siblings, half siblings. So Mary had Jesus, little baby Jesus, and Joseph was the stepdad. If you remember that story from Christmas. But Mary and Joseph then went on to have a lot of kids. Several. I can't remember, like 6 plus, 5 plus, something like that. Anyway, it's in the Bible somewhere. I can't remember where. Anyhow, so James was one of those siblings. And James and all the other siblings at one point thought Jesus was crazy when he was doing his ministry, so they weren't really buying into the whole Messiah thing and all of that. But after Jesus died and rose from the dead, James turned and he became one of the most avid followers of Jesus. So you have to think about that. Like, what would your brother or sister have to do in order to convince you that they were God, the Messiah, Savior of the world? Probably a lot. James made that decision, turned on that, he believed that, and that's one of the strongest arguments for the fact that Jesus really did rise from the dead, is the story of James. But anyway, all that to say, James gives us a book in the New Testament, some teachings that he gave to the churches in those days, and it's called, we find it in your Bibles, in the book called James, which makes sense. So, in the book of James, James gives some teachings to the church, and he makes this comment in James chapter 4. I want to show you. This is what he said. James 4. Now listen, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go to this city and spend a year there, carry on business, and make money. Right? That sounds like the 90s. That sounds like Israel during the time of David and Solomon. Let's go here. Let's do a new business adventure. Let's make some money. It's going to be great. Man, it'll be awesome. We'll be rolling in. Woo, let's make it happen. Right? That's kind of, and James is saying, now listen, I have something to say to you. Verse 14 he says, why? You do not even know what will happen tomorrow. Right? When you get to presume and expect everything's going to be fine tomorrow, and I'm not here to make you paranoid, but James is like, you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. You have a little bit of hubris, you have quite a bit of arrogance in the way you're thinking here. It says, you don't even know what's going to happen tomorrow. What is your life? You're a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes. Right? That's encouraging. James has got away with words. Verse 15, then, he says, instead, he's going to give us another way to think about it. He says, instead, you ought to say, if it's the Lord's will, we'll live, do this, do that. As it is, you boast in your arrogant schemes, and all such boasting is evil. James is a little heavy-handed. He's coming at you pretty strong there, with some strong words. But I think the point right there, he's exhorting us not to become overconfident about life, and about our plans, and about what we're expecting from life. Do you even know? You don't even know what tomorrow holds. And you speak so confidently about something you have no control over. Sure, we have certain agency, and I don't want to disregard that, right? We can take responsibility for ourselves. We can make decisions about our life and choose a direction. But that's not the final. That's not absolute. We are not gods. There's a lot we don't have control over. And we, as humans, we have to, this is the emphasis. We need to keep that in mind. Remember that. James is exhorting us to walk through life with humility. The humility that recognizes we're not gods and that there are many things in life we just simply don't have control over. And help us embrace this idea that life is fragile, life is precious, it's a gift. Your relationships are gifts, your job is a gift, your home is a gift, your children are gifts, your parents, your friends, gifts. So today, as we think about disruption, these past 18 months, as we think about the story of Israel, as we think about moving forward and how to move forward in our world today, I want to invite you to recognize the gifts that you have in life. The good things. And together we can learn to hold them loosely. Right? This is a good gift. I would love to say, and it shall never be destroyed. But it might be. And I'm just going to learn to walk with God, enjoy God, the presence that God offers in life, but also recognize that there's mystery at work. Sometimes these things are elusive. We don't really know what will happen tomorrow or the next week. And that life rarely works out the way we had planned. And yet, even in all that, beauty, goodness, grace, fullness, abundance, healing, redemption, forgiveness, all of those things are born out of this posture of humility. Taking one step at a time on the journey that we call life. So, maybe we need to hold more loosely the things we have now. Learning to cherish every moment we have. Learning to walk through the seasons of disruption with wisdom, humility, and grace. Let's pray. Jesus, thank you so much for these minutes that we can think through some of this today. As we think about disruption, as we think about the story of Israel and their exile, and how unbelievably traumatic that experience was for this people. They lost everything. Lost their homes, lost their way of life, lost their religious worship. They were hauled off into a foreign nation where they were mistreated in many ways and abused. And they had to process where you were in all of that, who you were, what they could expect from you. So in many ways, we all walk similar journeys. We have ups and downs, we have hardships, we have disruptions, we have pain and suffering that breaks into our lives unwelcomed and unexpected. We have to wrestle with, where are we? Why this? Why now? What does this mean for how I view the world, how I view God, how I view people and family and relationships? So I pray that the work that's done in our heart might be that we can hold loosely and walk in humility, walk humbly with our God. We know you are present to us right here, right now. You are with us, for us, leading us, loving us. So we pray that you help us walk in that mystery, that mysterious tension. And might that enable us to walk through this life with greater faith, hope, and love, and redemption, forgiveness, kindness, compassion, and empathy, and all the things that we truly need in this world today. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
But it couldn't fill me.
Donuts for hanging out with us here this morning. Really appreciate you attending service here with us today on this fun celebratory day. Remember, if you haven't filled out that digital connection card, whether you're home watching online or whether you're here in the room, please take a moment to do that. We do have Duck Donuts out there in the lobby, so stick around, hang out, have some of those. And then we also have the bounce houses up and running outside, so the kids can all hang out. So if you don't have, again, it's just 11:48, 1 o'clock kickoff for the Eagles game. You got plenty of time. Hang out, say hello to somebody, and get to know some fellow folks here at Life Church. So thanks for being here. We'll go part 2 of this sermon series next week. I'll be sticking around any questions, but I hope to see you next week. And until then, Godspeed.